Welcome to Beyond the Card, a series that explores the lives of librarians, library patrons, and everyone who walks through that door. Get ready to open the book on the story of our lives.
Welcome to Beyond the Card, a series that explores the lives of librarians, library patrons, and everyone who walks through that door. Today I have with me...
Hi, I'm Nesseth. I am an author of nonfiction science books, and I am a patron of the Greatest Sudbury Libraries.
Welcome, Nina. Thank you for coming to hang out with me. I'm actually really excited about this episode. Not only are you a friend, I think you contribute a lot to the literary space, not only as an avid reader and someone who always has something on hold, but as a writer yourself. So we're going to go through a couple of questions, and you're one of the few people I feel like hasn't looked at some of the questions beforehand, so they're going to be very off the top of your head. So one of the first...
I have no idea what's in store for me.
Yeah. One of the first questions is, why are libraries important?
Libraries exist as hubs within the community. Like I use the library not only for books, but I've taken workshops at the makerspace, and I made bath bombs one time. That was really good. and I also really enjoy using the different services that the library has to offer and attending little workshops that are hosted there. Mostly though, I do use the library to access books that I have a hard time finding anywhere else, especially since I'm on my 85th book of this year, and it's only May. So if I bought every single book that I read in a year, I would have no money for food. So I'm very, very grateful that the library exists so I can access these.
Yeah, I feel like you, like, especially someone like you who is an, like, again, avid reader and sets challenges for themselves, like, sustainability in terms of you purchasing books just like would not exist in terms of a budget or like just even sheer volume of like space books take up.
Something that's really interesting about the library too that I've noticed in this age of digital streaming is that the library sort of exists as a bit of an archive or like a bit of a capsule, especially when it comes to films, because I use so many streaming services. Like I'm sure many people who have access to them do as well, because you have to almost have 5 different streaming services to piece together everything that you want to watch. But the library has this really interesting catalog of films that I can't find because their licenses aren't owned by any of these streaming services. So I often, when I'm having a hard time finding a movie, usually the library ends up being my first stop, because they have just this like huge catalog of movies like stretching back decades.
Yeah, what's wonderful too is that like the interlibrary loan service actually allows you to access even more movies, because like as much as we have a wonderful collection, sometimes we just don't have things that are super niche, or like a Canadian film that was filmed in the 70s or something, and the Toronto Library might have that, and they most likely do. So it's super cool that like those do exist. And I do know that a lot of my favorite movies, someone who is an avid movie watcher, like Cinema Paradiso and things like that, aren't available on those streaming services, or inaccessible in terms of region specific movies, right? So yeah, we do have some gems in our collection for sure. So seeing that you are an avid reader, and that the library is a place that you do use quite often, how has the library impacted you?
I am currently, we're in quarantine, so I'm really missing the library. Um, because as much as I don't really have as much time as I wish I could have to just browse the aisles. Um, I love using the library to to, well, to find more things to read, but I also love it just because I love talking to the people who work there when I come through the doors.
It's like a social escape for you.
It really is. You borrow a lot of books when the librarians recognize you and know you have a hold on, um, when you walk through the doors. So, um, I think that's probably a huge piece of it. I used to work in a bookstore, and that social element, um, and conversation with readers is always, really meaningful to me. I used to be someone who would recommend books to as a a bookseller, um, and I get to like be on the other side of those conversations at the library.
Yeah,
And
it's kind of like a cool, if you think about it too, right? A lot of people hate small talk, and you have a lot of small talk with people in your life to be courteous, to be polite, to be, sociable. You say those things like, oh, the weather's great outside today, or oh, I can't believe it's snowing again. But being able to kind of like suggest a book, or even talk about how someone is taking out a book or a movie and go, oh, that's one of my favorites, or just kind of like give them something without a spoiler, obviously, and have kind of a more meaningful conversation within that piece, instead of just blurting out something to say something. You can kind of relate to each other in your love of fiction, or your love of nonfiction, or someone's taking out a quilting book and you can be like, oh, my grandma taught me how to quilt, or something. There's those really cool little things that I think allow themselves to enter your conversation in terms of that as well.
yeah, and I never feel judged when I'm like going down a rabbit hole and I take out like 5 books on parasitic worms or something like that. Like,
Yeah, no judgment at the front desk. I think we're interested in what piques people's curiosities, right? Because the library has so many things to offer that just like, I genuinely don't even know what's in all of our collections. So sometimes things come through and you go like, well, didn't know we had that, but that's an interesting read. So yeah, I get it. On that note too, just of parasitic worm books, so you've checked out a lot of materials. So this is, I know you have a huge list of things that you have to go through, but is there anything that you think holds a significance to you specifically? It could be a book, it could be a movie, but this also includes 3D objects that our library does offer. So is there something from the library that you think holds a significance to you that has impacted your life?
I actually found some of my favorite books at the Sudbury Library first. You can find this book anywhere now, but there was a time when I really, really wanted to read We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, and it was not on sale at our local booksellers, and I wasn't really, it was before really, Amazon had a huge niche in terms of book selling or any of those sorts of online outlets. And the only place I found that book was at the Greater Sudbury main branch. And I took that book out so many times, uh, because it was the only place I could go to read it. And it became my favorite book from my first reading. Um, and I do own my own copy of it now, but for the longest time, that's where I went when I had to read that book. So I kind of have to thank the library for having access to that title that wasn't widely available at the time,
Mm.
so that it could become my favorite book.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the questions that we like to ask, because we like to bring kids into the library and teach them about the space and let them learn new things within our library, and we always want it to be a good experience. So what is your earliest library memory?
I didn't grow up in Sudbury, so I don't have any memories of the Sudbury Library, but my earliest library memories would be doing school projects. Because I grew up in the 90s and we didn't have the internet yet. So I was doing a school project on frogs, and I took out so many books on frogs. There's a picture of lots of pictures of frogs. I remember lots of pictures of frogs. I remember that I took out lots of books on magic tricks because I was really, really keen to learn magic tricks so I could show people when like my parents' friends would come over. I would like, try to take all their attention and show them the magic tricks I've learned. And I
This is why we
remember,
became friends later in life.
yes. And I remember borrowing The Secret Garden, the book, not the movie, and it being such a big deal because it was the first book I ever had to renew because it was so long. And it took me so long to get through it, but I just remember the achievement attached to reading The Secret Garden. Ultimately, I found it kind of boring, but like I still felt like this huge achievement because I had to like take so long reading it that I had to renew a book, and I felt like I wasn't reading baby books anymore. Those are my earliest memories. All have to do with, yeah, mostly research.
Yeah, I mean, that seems right for who you are. So I don't think that's out of the realm. And we weren't talking specifically about separate memories. We've had a few guests who grew up in Europe or grew up out of town, and it's really just like that first initial experience within the library. Mine was at the New Sudbury Library, and it's weird because I talk to other people who I work with, and we're in the same age group, and we have a very similar experience that the New Sudbury Library was being renovated when we were young, and there was like this new children's area, and like it was so exciting to go in there and see this wonderful library be like, I don't know, rejuvenated and and very exciting, and you got your library card, and it was a field trip that you went on. So it's weird to share that. Like, remember that like Northern Gothic post? I feel like that's a very like Sudbury Gothic post.
I think so. It sounds like it. I
Yeah.
know, oh gosh, I'm pretty sure even when I did that frog project, I was probably like 6 or 7, like grade 1 or grade 2. And I'm pretty sure I used a card catalog to find that
Oh,
book.
without a doubt
Like
you used
old
the card.
school
Yeah.
card catalog with the drawers, trying to find the word frog.
It's weird. Our card catalogs are actually like very sought after. We still only have one, I think. Like, it's super hard to have kept it intact. Like, they just don't exist anymore because it was either people wanted them or they were deemed useless, so they just got like chucked away. And so like talk to our local historian librarian and like just hear about the card catalog, and it's wonderful. So going through kind of this spectrum of libraries for you now, libraries for you then, libraries and how they impact you. Libraries go from like a quiet space to a study to kind of a more community-based library that we see it as today, with programs that happen or community spaces that invite people to come in and share their experiences. Do you think that libraries have room to evolve, and where do you see libraries going in the future?
Oh, totally. Libraries have room to evolve, and I think they always have a place in our community. I think libraries are already evolving, and I often see them at the forefront of, like, in the work that I do right now. I do a lot of informal education, and I see that libraries are often kind of on the leading edge of developing that informal learning programming, or like other informal programs for like skills-based learning for people in the community, and giving access to those resources that members of our community might not have access to. And I think that in terms of evolving their programming, like, there's so much ways that libraries can stretch based on sort of individual community needs, if that makes sense, because
Sure.
different libraries would flourish in different zones depending on a reflection of what that community kind of
Yeah,
is
and
lacking.
and
They
that's
fill
true.
gaps.
Yeah, like, and that's true of all 13 of our branches, right? The main library has different needs than the library in Levac does, and that always kind of is evolving and changing depending on growing communities. Sometimes there are communities that have an excess of children that are growing up there and need support or that kind of after school activity or those craft-based activities, or, you know, just access to the internet or any kind of STEM involved programming that exists that we can deliver. And then it changes, because then those kids grow up and then those kids become teenagers, and there are no small children in that community anymore, and it's always evolving and it's always changing. So it's kind of, we have to find those ways to meet those needs.
And honestly, I love coming to the library now and seeing, like, in the kind of programming areas that stuff's going on, that people are, you know, engaging with some, you know, live reading or some sort of event that's going on, some sort of workshop, info session. I there's a small part of me, like in the back of my spine, that just like craves the quiet of like the old
Library
school
old.
library. But I think it's just because I've been trained that way. We've all like come from a generation where we've been trained to like, shh, you're in the library, you be quiet.
For sure.
And so I just like feel it in my bones, but I am willing to fight it because I'm way happier to see, you know, people engage with stuff, because libraries aren't meant to be museums.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like there is room for both of those spaces within our library.
Like
Our
quiet
libraries,
spaces.
yeah, like our libraries tend to be a little on the smaller side, and that's in part because we're a smaller community, and extending, going to any of the outlining branches, those are even smaller communities. So the space doesn't need to be grand or large, but I feel like if we looked at any kind of major city, those don't need to exist in, like, they can coexist, especially if your library is multiple floors, or it, again, it's probably architecture and design that's going to kind of allow you those spaces, and like have a floor that is, you know, quiet study space where no one can talk. It exists within our Laurentian library even, right? There is a quiet floor, there is a room where you can go where you can sit and read and no one can talk. It's a quiet space. And then there's just the regular lounge where everyone can meet, study, talk, be as loud as they need to be. And I think that's the important part to remember, that it's still a community-based space. And you're right, it's not a museum. And there's nothing that you need to be quiet about, really, I suppose. And I get what you're saying, because I grew up in that kind of, when you were in school and you went to the library, you were told you needed to be quiet and you couldn't talk there. And then you went on field trips and you went to the library and you needed to be quiet and be behaved and not talk there. And now, as someone who runs programs where it's boisterous and loud, and I feel like a lot of mine are, because it has to do with a lot of creative writing or performance, or you know, allowing children to find escape in games or whatever, they kind of find that I like the loud space, but that's, again, a personal preference, I think.
You have a lot of energy to put out into the world.
I do have a lot of energy to put out into the world. So I feel like I would like to create those spaces that the introverts and extroverts can coexist within that space, because it's for both of us. Well, thank you so much, Nina, for coming to talk to me today. I think it's great to get someone like you's opinion on just the library in general, someone who isn't necessarily working in the library but has a great love for libraries, and someone who is in our space in a completely different way, as someone who writes books and is a published author and is someone who has that space now for other people to discover your writing and discover what you do and share in that love and joy that you have in your writing. And so, you know, it's great to talk to librarians and it's great to talk to programmers, but of course we love the library. uh, we're going to talk it up no matter what. So again, thank you for coming to hang out.
Thank you for inviting me.